Ladies and gentlemen, a very rousing welcome for our friend Scott Rasmussen.
Well, thank you very much. As a New Jersey resident, I'm quite happy with the Pennsylvania liquor laws. Keep spending your money in my state. About 90 years ago at this time, there was a Scottish Presbyterian woman. I'm told she was quite cute, and she caught the eye of a dark-haired Roman Catholic Irish boy. And because it was 1923 in Connecticut, they weren't allowed to see each other. And they were a little rebellious in spirit, and so probably when their parents said they couldn't see each other, they decided to see each other a little bit more. And on the morning of July 4th, 1924, this couple decided to elope and declare their own independence. So they got on a train, went into New York City, went to a little church they wanted to get married in, and it was closed. So they got on the train, went back home, said, we'll try again tomorrow. On July 5th, they did the same thing. This time the church was open, and they got married. But on the way home, on the train, they lost their nerve, and they couldn't tell their families what they had done. So they lived the first week of their married life in their family homes. And when they finally worked up the courage to tell their parents what had happened, they were disowned by both families and not welcome in either house for almost a decade. We can't believe that today in the 21st century. I happen to know this story because I call those two people Nana and Grandpa. I lived with them all the summers of my youth. And one of the things that happened is I would go to church with them, and whenever a preacher started talking denominational jokes, the Baptist said this and the Presbyterian said that, steam would come out of my grandparents' ears. And I was told and taught that that was not funny. And the reason I bring this up today is that was an event that happened 90 years ago, and it is still very much a part of my life. My kids have heard the story. It will outlast me because of that experience. There's a lot of talk in the political world about, what are Republicans and conservatives going to do to win the Latino vote or the black vote? And there's all this talk about maybe if they just follow the right path on immigration reform or some other issue, the numbers will change. That's ludicrous. It is a much longer and deeper process, and it doesn't start with the way you vote. It starts with the way you talk to each other. Go watch the movie 42, the story of Jackie Robinson. Now, if you're somebody who was born after 1947, you watch that movie and you see the way a World War II veteran was treated, and you say, boy, I'm thankful that that's such a long time ago and our country isn't like that anymore. Jackie Robinson's widow, 2 of his 3 kids are alive. It's very real to them and to other people they interact with. If we think that those things are a really long time ago, we're really missing the point. You have to take into account the reality of these experiences. You have to recognize that when an African American in America today hears you say, well, race relations are a lot better than they've ever been before, and all we need are some free market principles and we'll all live happily ever after, they're not going to listen to anything else you say. And this becomes a part of an ongoing story that we miss in the world of politics. Most political activists, and this is liberals as well as conservatives, think everything happens in the state capitol or everything happens in Washington. In fact, almost all the important things in life happen outside the world of politics, and eventually the politicians catch up. With the issue that I mentioned earlier with my grandparents, it is ludicrous today, not because a law was passed, but because lots of people like my grandparents began to change their attitudes. So you bring this thought process into the political world today and take a look at the issue of immigration. You can talk all you want about what the laws should be. Doesn't matter what your position is on this comprehensive reform bill. What matters is how you talk about people. We have a nation where 68% of Americans believe that legal immigration is good for the country. Where most Americans, more Republicans than Democrats, believe we should have a welcoming immigration policy. And they also believe we should have secure borders. But when Republican and conservative politicians talk about the issue, they sound pretty hateful towards immigrants. And you know what? Most Americans are not at all upset with immigrants. They understand why somebody would want to bring their family here. They understand the opportunities. They're proud of the fact that our country is a land of opportunity. What they're angry at is the fact that we have a government that isn't enforcing laws. They're angry at employers who are knowingly and repeatedly hiring illegal immigrants in violation of the law. We did a poll last week to ask what would be the most effective ways of securing the border. And the answers have absolutely nothing to do with building a fence or more border patrol agents or anything of that sort. People think incentives matter. Almost sounds like a free market concept. They think that if we end federal aid to sanctuary cities, if we end some of the other financial incentives to bring people across the border, they think if we do crack down on employers who are knowingly hiring illegal immigrants, if we take away all those things, they think the illegal immigration will slow. That's more effective than anything else. But the starting point for the conversation has to be respect for other people. And if conservatives and Republicans don't learn to speak a different language and don't learn to speak of the positive aspects that come out of immigrants coming to our country, there is no way to open the conversation for ever winning the vote of a minority American. Again, I'm not telling you what your principles should be or what your policy should be, but let's start with a more positive conversation. And you see this across a range of issues. Conservatives and Republicans get so hung up in their policy ideas that they sometimes forget who they're talking to or the way their words are being received. You know, one of the things you learn when you speak in public, what you say is often not what other people hear. And that applies to policy issues as well. We live in a country right now where only 35% of voters, 1 out of 3 voters, believe that our economy is fair to the middle class. Now, sometimes economic conservatives say you can't talk about fairness. That's just another word for income redistribution or something else, or it's in the eye of the beholder. And I agree, it's impossible to define fairness. But most Americans do think some definition of fairness is relevant. It's not just getting a faster growth rate that matters. And by the way, you'll be pleased to know 86% of Americans say that if an entrepreneur starts a very successful business, it's fair for him to become very rich. People believe that if you work hard, you should be rewarded for your efforts. That's how most people define fairness, and that's what they want to see in our economic system. Instead, they heard a Republican presidential candidate last year talk about the 47% who were dependent on government. One of the most harmful statements, gaffes, ever uttered by a presidential candidate. First of all, it was an inaccurate statement. Most of that 47% voted for Mitt Romney because they were senior citizens who are living on Social Security. Polls show that people who are in lower income groups are more opposed to higher taxes than upper income Americans. So Mitt Romney was in effect attacking his base. And another problem with this is people who are living in poverty are more committed to seeing an economy that gives opportunities than anybody else. 80% of people living in poverty today say the best solution to poverty is a job. They're not looking for a handout. What is important, again, in this discussion is the way you have the dialogue. We have a country right now, and this figure that I'm about to throw out, or this comment that I'm about to throw out, is one of the most depressing things to me that we've found in years and years of polling. We asked people, do we have a free market economic system in the United States, or do we have a system of crony capitalism? And people are split right down the middle. And the reason for that is about a quarter of our economy these days is directly under the control of government. We do have a large crony capitalist sector in the United States, and if you are a free market conservative, it might be wise to be attacking that segment of the economy rather than going after people who are having a difficult time in their life. In fact, if you really want to attack those who are dependent on government, you might start by going after the largest mega banks, 12 banks that account for about 70% of the banking industry, and whose entire profit is the result of government subsidies. You might also go after others in the political class and others on corporate welfare, but that system that we have right now is perceived as grossly unfair. If you're a free market conservative, to go after crony capitalism is a great way to demonstrate a commitment to economic fairness that is consistent with your principles. And as an aside, it boggles my mind that there is not a Republican or a conservative leader somewhere who is leading a big crusade to break up the biggest banks. Again, these banks are making a profit simply because of government subsidies that result from the fact that they're considered too big to fail. It's a great target for a free market activist, and it's not happening right now. That's the kind of issue that over time can change perceptions of what you're talking about. Now, I mention these types of things because we again get so hung up in storylines that come out of elections. The focus is always on why did Mitt Romney lose, who's going to be the nominee in 2016, what's going to happen after this. There's a bigger story going on. There is a sweeping change coming to America, much bigger than the next election. I'll put it in fiscal policy terms by saying the last time government spending in America went down from one year to the next was 2 years before I was born. And that was a long, long time ago, unfortunately. I believe in the next 10 years, we're actually going to see a retreat. Government spending will actually go down. We are going to see a fundamental shift in the relationship between the American people and their political leaders. And it's not going to come because a knight in shining armor gets elected to the White House and changes everything. It's going to come because of what individual Americans do. I'm going to talk about the health care law in a moment because I know that's a passionate subject. It's going to hurt the president and his party in the 2014 midterms. But to set the context, I need to ask you, how many people here have a 401k plan? Okay, almost everybody, a lot of people. Do you know that that was never intended by Congress? There was a tax act passed in 1978. The legislative summary lists 27 different major provisions in the bill, things like it reduced the top tax rate from 48% to 46%. And nowhere in the official legislative summary or the notes sent out by individual members of Congress to their constituents do you find any reference to the 401k provision. There was a benefits consultant in the Philadelphia area named Ted Benna who read the law, actually read what was written rather than what was talked about, and he found a loophole in section 401k of that law. He tried to convince his clients to take advantage of this, and the first group said no because they were afraid of government reprisals, but eventually some companies began to try setting these programs up because they wanted to offer benefits to their employees. They wanted to attract the best people, so they offered the best benefits. Today, there are 50 million 401k accounts that Congress never intended to authorize, but one man found. Now, let's talk about the president's health care law. How many of you have read all 2,000 plus pages? What we have is a system that was set up by the President of the United States. He expects the health care plan to work in a certain way, and we already know it's not working the way he intended. The reason we know that is one of the working assumptions was that all 50 states would be excited about setting up an exchange to help implement this. Didn't work out that way. And I want to tell you something else about it. Only 1 out of 3 Americans even know if their state has set up a healthcare exchange. This is not something that the American people are up in arms about. Now, polling shows that people like some provisions in the law, and they even like the idea that an insurance company should offer you a plan that has everything covered. But almost 8 out of 10 Americans also say they want more choice in their health care provisions. Specifically, what they want is if your employer offers you a health care plan, comprehensive coverage, you should be able to choose all the things that you don't want, and whatever savings result from that, you should keep the change. So the president requires you to be offered a plan that covers everything, and you say, I really just want major medical coverage and a few other things. You go to the insurance company and they say, well, that would be, this much less each month. You get that in your paycheck. If you give people that kind of power, it's going to change the health care law. And it may already be in there, because I don't know what's going to happen, but there are benefits consultants, just like Ted Benna, who are scouring every page of the president's law looking for loopholes. Now, there's already a couple of exceptions. Companies that self-insure don't have to abide by all the provisions of the president's law. There are more companies looking to self-insure today. Another, and this is going to sound crazy to if you were part of the president's team, but another loophole is if an employer offers you a program that matches the government offer requirements and you turn it down, the company's off the hook. Why would you turn it down? Well, they might be able to offer you a better alternative, a lower cost alternative that doesn't cover as much. I don't know what the precise mechanisms will be, but I know that voters and consumers are looking for ways to control their health care situation. They don't want the government making the choices. They don't want an insurance company making the choices. They want to make them on their own. That pressure, plus whatever really was written in that law, are going to change the shape of health care coverage in America. And if that wasn't enough, think about this. Every morning, I wake up, prick my finger, and check my blood sugar. 10 years from now, almost everybody in this country will do some kind of self-test like that. They will prick their finger, drop it into something that goes into an iPhone app or whatever other smartphone they're using. It'll be sent off to their doctor's office. Doctors won't perform the way they do today. They'll do some variance analysis to make sure your weight and your blood sugar and other things are all in line. And if there's a problem, well, then you'll talk to them. If not, you'll keep right on going. At the other end of the spectrum, are you all familiar with the IBM computer Watson? It won the Jeopardy game. Right now, it is reviewing all the cases from the Sloan Kettering Institute. They believe that this computer will do a better job of diagnosing patients than any doctor can do. And there is a great expectation that other medical facilities will begin to adopt similar things. Now, I don't know how that's going to turn out either, but I do know that nothing in the healthcare debate we've had in the last couple of years will seem relevant to that new discussion. There's one study out that actually says that we will need only 20% of the doctors we have today within a generation. The doctors that we have will be doing the highest level issues, and they'll be doing the surgeries, but none of the routine care. Don't know what those numbers will look like. Free markets lead us in directions we can never anticipate. What I'm trying to convey, though, is a sense, it doesn't really matter whether or not the health care law passed by President Obama gets repealed. What does matter is how the American people use it and twist it to their own benefit. And as they do that, it will lead to more free market choices, and those consumer choices will eventually bring down the cost of health care and improve the quality of care. When you go to Washington and you tell people that, it's really nice what you guys are doing, but it's more important what's happening in the country, they kind of look at you funny, because in Washington they do want to believe that they are the rulers of the universe. And yet you can cite example after example of things that begin outside of Washington and change the country. Ted Kennedy once said, "The beauty of America is that change always begins at the ballot box." He obviously never heard of Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Henry Ford or other entrepreneurs, because the truth is change almost always begins outside government and in the private sector. And the other thing that happens when we gather in groups like this, people talk about there's too much government or there's not enough private sector business. And we ignore the fact that much of what makes life worth living doesn't happen in either government or business. Our society thrives on things like little leagues and local theater groups and bowling leagues and all kinds of things that we can decide we want to take part in. We look at the government and our jobs and others as part of our life, but it's not like we look to them for direction. We did some polling recently to find out what kinds of things do people really feel connected to in their life. Not surprisingly, family comes out first. Almost everybody feels some connection to their family. 76% feel a very strong connection. The next two items that people feel closely connected with are their jobs and their church. More than a third of Americans feel very closely connected to those institutions. Only 5% feel very connected to their government. Even fewer feel very connected to a local political party or group. That means that if you're involved in one of those local political groups and you're an activist, you need to find ways to talk to people other than talking about politics. You need to find ways to talk to people about the things that matter to their lives, to build on the connections. And you need to find ways to explain how your ideas and your principles will improve the life they're leading. Sure, it's good to talk about budget deficits. There's concerns there. It's good to talk about important issues and Second Amendment rights. But for most people, most of the time, the concerns are closer to home. And when you can translate a big issue into something closer to home, you win all around. We were talking at the table earlier about the massive federal budget deficit. And officially it's about $16 trillion. If you add in all the unfunded liabilities, it's more than $100 trillion. And you start talking to people about numbers that big and their eyes glaze over. And really, can you tell me the difference between $16 trillion and $100 trillion? The numbers are just so big, they don't mean anything anymore. How do you deal with that? You talk about getting the individual programs to work a little better in individual people's lives. Social Security is an issue that has lots of passionate believers in different sides of it. Some want to privatize it entirely, some want to never change it. The numbers say we have a $19 trillion unfunded liability in Social Security alone. To fix it, let people pick their own retirement age. Sounds pretty simple. If you want to retire earlier, you pay more in taxes. If you want to retire later, you pay less in taxes, but it's your choice. You don't have to rely on Congress to pick the right trade-off. You decide it. And you can set this up in a way that wipes out that entire unfunded liability and makes Social Security sustainable. Now, most people, even people into their 50s, will pick pushing the retirement age back a little bit and lower taxes today. Some of them will spend that extra money. Some of them will set it aside for their own retirement planning. Doesn't matter. You're putting the choice back where it belongs. And if you can begin to talk about solving problems on a personal level by letting people make their own choices, you begin to solve the larger problems of our nation. It's just like my grandparents and their peers began to change attitudes towards dating between Catholics and Presbyterians, just like Jackie Robinson began to change ideas of who can play Major League Baseball. These things begin to build upon themselves. Few people realize that 4 years before Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. In 1943, when she did that, nothing happened. There were no riots, no protests. What they then called the Negro community didn't want to deal with a troublemaker. It wasn't until 12 years later in 1955, after Jackie Robinson and many other African Americans began to play ball and other things changed, that Rosa Parks did the same thing again and ignited a civil rights revolution. It's changes from outside with public opinion changing that eventually leads to a much more powerful and lasting change in America. And I know that when I speak to political activists, they have a real hard time because really, right now what you want to do is you want to make sure that Republicans get control of the Senate, that your governor and lieutenant governor are reelected. You want to make sure that the other good things happen by your definition of what's correct policy. But I want to tell you a story that shows it's really not about the size of government or the correct policies. On the morning, March 12th, 2010, many of you were probably getting excited about the 2010 midterms. I was excited because my youngest son was coming home from college for his first spring break ever. My wife and I went to bed that night and we were just amazed at how much he'd changed since he'd gone to college. And we were really excited about getting to spend a week with him. About 5 o'clock in the morning, we heard some yelling and screaming outside, and I was a little irritated, thought it was some drunks whooping it up, and my wife got up to look outside and see what was going on, and the next thing we saw were some police sirens and lights coming down the street. So I rolled over, I thought, good, police are coming to take care of it. A moment later, there was a knock on our door, and my wife wanted to run downstairs, and I said, do not open that door unless the man is wearing a uniform. And it was a police officer. And at this point, it was about 5:15 in the morning. And the officer said, the hotel next to you, the Manchester Hotel, is engulfed in flames. Be prepared to evacuate. And she came upstairs. We got dressed. She went out and got in the car. I told my son, he's a jazz performance major, I said, get your guitars and get out. I packed my laptop, did a few other things, and then I realized my older son, he was in London allegedly studying English for a college program. And, when you're a parent, you don't want to play favorites. So I ran upstairs to get his bass guitar. And his room was to the left, and the hotel was to the right. And when I got to the top of the stairs, I looked to the right and saw the flame jump. And I grabbed his guitar and ran out of that house, and I knew I didn't care about anything else in the house. By 6 o'clock that morning, 45 minutes after the cop knocked on our door, our house was gone. And when I say it was gone, it's taken me years before I could really talk about this. When I say it was gone, the appliances melted, the bikes melted. We had absolutely nothing left. 23 years of marriage, and our baby pictures were gone, and our wedding gifts were gone, and our souvenirs were gone. We were alive, though. About 9 o'clock that morning, we found ourselves out at a McDonald's. We had already registered with the Red Cross and given our statements to the police and whatever else we had to do. And I'm a list person, and I can laugh about it now because I was clearly in shock. But, I'm trying to make a list of what we should do, and I noticed my son didn't have shoes, so I thought, buy shoes. And I didn't have a jacket, buy jacket. And before the day was out, we spent about $800 at a Target to just get basic supplies. Well, over the next 20 months, we rebuilt our house and our lives. We rebuilt on the same spot. And as much as I love the charm of an 1870s house, I really appreciate the insulation and the three-prong outlets. It's a much nicer circumstance. But during that 20 months, a community came together to help us out. We did have the police officer who saved our lives. We got our picture taken with him. There were 200 firefighters that came in that day. Some of them were volunteers, some of them were professional. We had people from our church and people we didn't even know coming to offer us food and clothes and places to stay. And after a while, it got to be so much that we started to tell them, we're really okay. We have good insurance. Worry about the people in Haiti. But the support from all those people, plus our faith, got us through, something I hope none of you ever have to experience. We had people who sent us family pictures, digital photos from others, and the insurance company was great, the township was great. Never once during that entire process did we stop to think, is this support coming from the government or the private sector? To us, it was a community coming together. We were grateful for the help from all sources. We had a problem that needed to be solved, and there were people there to solve it. And what that means, if you're talking about free market ideas and conservative principles, you need to understand that nobody in this country cares about limited government. They care about the kind of society that a limited government can create. You need to talk about the society. You need to talk about the positive things that can happen when a community works together. Because Americans want to work together, they want to find ways to do things together, and they want to solve problems. And your message should be, the only way that we can solve the problems of our nation is to unleash the power of community. Thank you very much.